Beginnings of U.S. President Trump, Part 2. Fixer Roy Cohn served as Trump's lawyer and mentor for 13 years in the 1970s and 1980s. According to Trump, Cohn sometimes waived fees due to their friendship. In 1973, Cohn helped Trump countersue the United States government for $100 million over its charges that Trump's properties had racial discriminatory practices. Trump and Cohn lost the case when the countersuit was dismissed and the government's case went forward. In 1975, an agreement was struck requiring Trump's properties to furnish the New York Urban League with a list of all apartment vacancies every week for 2 years, among other things. Cohn introduced political consultant Roger Stone to Trump, who enlisted Stone's services to deal with the federal government. As of November 2016, Trump and his businesses had been involved in more than 4,000 state and federal legal action, according to a running tally by USA Today. While Trump has not filed for personal bankruptcy, his over-leveraged hotel and casino businesses in Atlantic City and New York filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection 6 times between 1991 and 2009. They continued to operate while the banks restructured debt and reduced Trump's shares in the properties. During the 1980s, more than 70 banks had lent Trump $4 billion, but in the aftermath of his corporate bankruptcies of the early 1990s, most major banks declined to lend to him, with only Deutsche Bank still willing to lend money. After the January 6 United States Capitol attack, the bank decided not to do business with Trump or his company in the future. In April 2019, the House Oversight Committee issued subpoenas seeking financial details from Trump's banks, Deutsche Bank and Capital One, and his accounting firm, Mazars USA. In response, Trump sued the banks, Mazars, and committee chair Elijah Cummings to prevent the disclosures. In May, D.C. District Court Judge Amit Mater ruled that Mazars must comply with the subpoena, and Judge Edgardo Ramos of the Southern District Court of New York ruled that the banks must also comply. Trump's attorneys appealed the rulings, arguing that Congress was attempting to usurp the exercise of law enforcement authority that the Constitution reserves to the executive branch. Using ghostwriters, Trump has produced up to 19 books on business, financial, or political topics under his name. His first book, The Art of the Deal, was a New York Times bestseller. While Trump was credited as co-author, the entire book was written by Tony Schwartz. According to The New Yorker, the book expanded Trump's renown far beyond New York City, making him an emblem of the successful tycoon. Trump has called the volume his second favorite book, after the Bible. Trump made cameo appearances in many films and television shows from 1985 to 2001. Trump had a sporadic relationship with the professional wrestling promotion WWE since the late 1980s. He appeared at WrestleMania 23 in 2007 and was inducted into the celebrity wing of the WWE Hall of Fame in 2013. Starting in the 1990s, Trump was a guest about 24 times on the nationally syndicated Howard Stern show. He also had his own short-form talk radio program called Trumped. From 2004 to 2008. From 2011 until 2015, he was a weekly unpaid guest commentator on Fox and Friends. From 2004 to 2015, Trump was co-producer and host of reality shows The Apprentice and The Celebrity Apprentice. On The Apprentice, Trump played the role of a chief executive, and contestants competed for a year of employment at the Trump Organization. On The Celebrity Apprentice, celebrities competed to win money for charities. On both shows, Trump eliminated contestants with the catchphrase "You're fired." Trump, who had been a member since 1989, resigned from the Screen Actors Guild in February 2021 rather than face a disciplinary committee hearing for inciting the January 6, 2021 mob attack on the U.S. Capitol and for his reckless campaign of misinformation aimed at discrediting and ultimately threatening the safety of journalists. 2 days later, the union permanently barred him from readmission. Trump's political party affiliation has changed numerous times. He registered as a Republican in 1987, a member of the Independence Party, the New York State affiliate of the Reform Party. In 1999, a Democrat in 2001, a Republican in 2009, unaffiliated in 2011, and a Republican in 2012. In 1987, Trump placed full-page advertisements in 3 major newspapers, expressing his views on foreign policy and on how to eliminate the federal budget deficit. He ruled out running for local office but not for the presidency. In 1988, he approached Lee Atwater asking to be put into consideration as Republican nominee George H.W. Bush's running mate. Bush found the request strange and unbelievable. In 2000, Trump ran in the California and Michigan primaries for nomination as the Reform Party candidate for the 2000 United States presidential election but withdrew from the race in February 2000. A July 1999 poll matching him against likely Republican nominee George W. Bush and likely Democratic nominee Al Gore showed Trump with 7% support. In 2011, Trump speculated about running against President Barack Obama in the 2012 election, making his first speaking appearance at the Conservative Political Action Conference in February 2011 and giving speeches in early primary states. In May 2011, he announced he would not run, and he endorsed Mitt Romney in February 2012. Trump's presidential ambitions were generally not taken seriously at the time. Trump's fame and provocative statements earned him an unprecedented amount of free media coverage, elevating his standing in the Republican primaries. He adopted the phrase truthful hyperbole, coined by his ghostwriter Tony Schwartz, to describe his public speaking style. His campaign statements were often opaque and suggestive, and a record number of them were false. The Los Angeles Times wrote, "Never in modern presidential politics has a major candidate made false statements as routinely as Trump has." Trump said he disdained political correctness and frequently made claims of media bias. Trump announced his candidacy in June 2015. His campaign was initially not taken seriously by political analysts, but he quickly rose to the top of opinion polls. He became the front-runner in March 2016 and was declared the presumptive Republican nominee in May. Hillary Clinton led Trump in national polling averages throughout the campaign, but in early July her lead narrowed. In mid-July, Trump selected Indiana Governor Mike Pence as his vice presidential running mate, and the two were officially nominated at the 2016 Republican National Convention. Trump and Clinton faced off in 3 presidential debates in September and October 2016. Trump twice refused to say whether he would accept the result of the election. Trump's political positions and rhetoric were right-wing populist. Politico described them as eclectic, improvisational, and often contradictory, quoting a healthcare policy expert at the American Enterprise Institute as saying that his political positions were a total random assortment of whatever plays publicly. NBC News counted 141 distinct shifts on 23 major issues during his campaign. Trump's campaign platform emphasized renegotiating U.S.-China relations and free trade agreements such as NAFTA and the Trans-Pacific Partnership, strongly enforcing immigration laws, and building a new wall along the U.S.-Mexico border. In August 2016, Trump hired Steve Bannon, the executive chairman of Breitbart News, described by Bannon as the platform for the alt-right, as his campaign CEO. The alt-right movement coalesced around and supported Trump's candidacy, due in part to its opposition to multiculturalism and immigration. In an interview after the election, Trump said of the alt-right that he did not want to energize the group and that he disavowed them. Trump's FEC-required reports listed assets above $1.4 billion and outstanding debts of at least $315 million. Trump did not release his tax returns, contrary to the practice of every major candidate since 1976 and his promises in 2014 and 2015 to do so if he ran for office. He said his tax returns were being audited, and his lawyers had advised him against releasing them. After a lengthy court battle to block release of his tax returns and other records to the Manhattan District Attorney for a criminal investigation, including 2 appeals by Trump to the United States Supreme Court, in February 2021 the High Court allowed the records to be released to the prosecutor for review by a grand jury. In October 2016, portions of Trump's state filings for 1995 were leaked to a reporter from the New York Times. They show that Trump had declared a loss of $916 million that year, which could have let him avoid taxes for up to 18 years. On November 8, 2016, Trump received 306 pledged electoral votes versus 232 for Clinton. The official counts were 304 and 227 respectively, after defections on both sides. Trump received nearly 2.9 million fewer popular votes than Clinton, which made him the 5th person to be elected president while losing the popular vote. Trump is the only president who neither served in the military nor held any government office prior to becoming president. Trump's victory was a political upset. Polls had consistently shown Clinton with a nationwide, though diminishing, lead, as well as an advantage in most of the competitive states. Trump's support had been modestly underestimated, while Clinton's had been overestimated. Trump won 30 states, included were Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, which had been part of what was considered a blue wall of Democratic strongholds since the 1990s. Clinton won 20 states in the District of Columbia. Trump's victory marked the return of an undivided Republican government, a Republican White House combined with Republican control of both chambers of Congress. Trump's election victory sparked protests in major U.S. cities in the days following the election. On the day after Trump's inauguration, an estimated 2.6 million people worldwide, including an estimated 500,000 in Washington, D.C., protested against Trump in the women's marches. Trump was inaugurated on January 20, 2017. During his first week in office, he signed 6 executive orders, interim procedures in anticipation of repealing the Affordable Care Act, withdrawal from the Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiations, reinstatement of the Mexico City policy, authorizing the Keystone XL and Dakota Access Pipeline construction projects, reinforcing border security, and beginning the planning and design process to construct a wall along the U.S. border with Mexico. Trump's daughter Ivanka and son-in-law Jared Kushner became his assistant and senior advisor, respectively. Before being inaugurated, Trump moved his businesses into a revocable trust run by his sons, Eric and Donald Jr., and a business associate. He continued to profit from his businesses and to know how his administration's policies affected his businesses. Though Trump said he would eschew new foreign deals, the Trump Organization pursued expansions of its operations in Dubai, Scotland, and the Dominican Republic. Trump was sued for violating the domestic and foreign emoluments clauses of the U.S. Constitution, marking the first time that the clauses had been substantively litigated. The plaintiff said that Trump's business interests could allow foreign governments to influence him. After Trump's term had ended, the U.S. Supreme Court dismissed the cases as moot. Trump took office at the height of the longest economic expansion in American history, which began in June 2009 and continued until February 2020, when the COVID-19 recession began. In December 2017, Trump signed the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act of 2017. The bill had been passed by both Republican-controlled chambers of Congress without any Democratic votes. It reduced tax rates for businesses and individuals, with business tax cuts to be permanent and individual tax cuts set to expire after 2025, and eliminated the Affordable Care Act's individual requirement to obtain health insurance. The Trump administration claimed that the act would either increase tax revenues or pay for itself by prompting economic growth. Instead, revenues in 2018 were 7.6% lower than projected. Despite a campaign promise to eliminate the national debt in 8 years, Trump approved large increases in government spending and the 2017 tax cut. As a result, the federal budget deficit increased by almost 50% to nearly $1 trillion in 2019. Under Trump, the U.S. national debt increased by 39%, reaching $27.75 trillion by the end of his term. The U.S. debt-to-GDP ratio also hit a post-World War II high. Trump also failed to deliver the $1 trillion infrastructure spending plan on which he had campaigned. Trump is the only modern U.S. president to leave office with a smaller workforce, by 3 million, than when he took office. Trump rejects the scientific consensus on climate change. He reduced the budget for renewable energy research by 40% and reversed Obama-era policies directed at curbing climate change. In June 2017, Trump announced the withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement, making the U.S. the only nation in the world to not ratify the agreement. Trump aimed to boost the production and exports of fossil fuels. Natural gas expanded under Trump, but coal continued to decline. Trump rolled back more than 100 federal environmental regulations, including those that curbed greenhouse gas emissions, air and water pollution, and the use of toxic substances. He weakened protections for animals and environmental standards for federal infrastructure projects, and expanded permitted areas for drilling and resource extraction, such as allowing drilling in the Arctic Refuge. Trump's actions while president have been called a very aggressive attempt to rewrite our laws and reinterpret the meaning of environmental protections. On January 30, 2017, Trump signed Executive Order 13,771, which directed that for every new regulation, administrative agencies issue at least 2 prior regulations be identified for elimination. Agency defenders expressed opposition to Trump's criticisms, saying the bureaucracy exists to protect people against well-organized, well-funded interest groups. Trump dismantled many federal regulations on health, labor, and the environment, among other topics. Trump signed 14 Congressional Review Act resolutions repealing federal regulations, among them a bill that made it easier for severely mentally ill persons to buy guns. During his first 6 weeks in office, he delayed, suspended, or reversed 90 federal regulations, often made after requests by the regulated industries. During his campaign, Trump vowed to repeal and replace the Affordable Care Act. Trump scaled back the implementation of the ICA through Executive Orders 13,765 and 13,813. Trump expressed a desire to let Obamacare fail. His administration cut the ICA enrollment period in half and drastically reduced funding for advertising and other ways to encourage enrollment. Trump falsely claimed he saved the coverage of pre-existing conditions provided by the ICA. In June 2018, the Trump administration joined 18 Republican-led states in arguing before the Supreme Court that the elimination of the individual mandate had rendered the ICA unconstitutional. If they had succeeded, it would have eliminated health insurance coverage for up to 23 million Americans. During the 2016 campaign, Trump promised to protect funding for Medicare and other social safety net programs, but in January 2020, he suggested he was willing to consider cuts to such programs. In response to the opioid epidemic, Trump signed legislation in 2018 to increase funding for drug treatments, but was widely criticized for failing to make a concrete strategy. U.S. opioid overdose deaths declined slightly in 2018, but surged to a record 50,052 deaths in 2019. Trump said in 2016 that he was committed to appointing pro-life justices, pledging to appoint justices who would automatically overturn Roe v. Wade. He also said he supported traditional marriage but considered the nationwide legality of same-sex marriage a settled issue. In March 2017, his administration rolled back key components of the Obama administration's workplace protections against discrimination of LGBT people. Trump said he is opposed to gun control in general, although his views have shifted over time. After several mass shootings during his term, he said he would propose legislation to curtail gun violence, but this was abandoned in November 2019. His administration took an anti-marijuana position, revoking Obama-era policies that provided protections for states that legalized marijuana. Trump is a longtime advocate of capital punishment. Under his administration, the federal government executed 13 prisoners, more than in the previous 56 years combined and after a 17-year moratorium. In 2016, Trump said he supported the use of interrogation torture methods such as waterboarding but later appeared to recant this due to the opposition of Defense Secretary James Mattis. Most of Trump's pardons and commutations were granted to people with personal or political connections to him. In his term, Trump sidestepped regular Department of Justice procedures for considering pardons. Instead, he often entertained pardon requests from his associates or from celebrities. From 2017 to 2019, the pardons included former Arizona Sheriff Joe Arpaio, former Navy sailor Christian Saucier, who was convicted of taking classified photographs of classified areas inside a submarine, and right-wing commentator Dinesh D'Souza. Following a request by celebrity Kim Kardashian, Trump commuted the life sentence of Alice Marie Johnson, who had been convicted of drug trafficking. Trump pardoned or reversed the sentences of 3 American servicemen convicted or accused of committing war crimes in Afghanistan or Iraq. In November and December 2020, Trump pardoned 4 Blackwater private security contractors convicted of killing Iraqi civilians in the 2007 Nisour Square massacre. White-collar criminals Michael Milken and Bernard Kerik, and daughter Ivanka's father-in-law Charles Kushner. He also pardoned 5 people convicted as a result of investigations into Russian interference in the 2016 presidential elections: Michael Flynn, George Papadopoulos, Alex van der Stone, whose 40-month sentence for lying to Congress, witness tampering, and obstruction he had already commuted in July, and Paul Manafort. In his last full day in office, Trump granted 143 pardons and commutations. Those receiving pardons include Steve Bannon, Trump fundraiser Elliot Broidy, and 3 former Republican congressmen. Amongst those to receive sentence commutation were former Detroit mayor and Democrat Quayne Kilpatrick and sports gambler Billy Walters. The latter had paid tens of thousands of dollars to former Trump attorney John M. Dowd to plead his case with Trump. On June 1, 2020, federal law enforcement officials used batons, rubber bullets, pepper spray projectiles, stun grenades, and smoke to remove a largely peaceful crowd of protesters from Lafayette Square, outside the White House. Trump then walked to St. John's Episcopal Church, where protesters had set a small fire the night before. He posed for photographs holding a Bible, with senior administration officials later joining him in photos. Trump said on June 3 that the protesters were cleared because they tried to burn down the church and almost succeeded, describing the church as badly hurt. Religious leaders condemned the treatment of protesters and the photo opportunity itself. Many retired military leaders and defense officials condemned Trump's proposal to use the U.S. military against anti-police brutality protesters. The chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, General Mark Milley, later apologized for accompanying Trump on the walk and thereby create the perception of the military involved in domestic politics. Trump's proposed immigration policies were a topic of bitter and contentious debate during the campaign. He promised to build a wall on the Mexico-United States border to restrict illegal movement and vowed Mexico would pay for it. He pledged to deport millions of illegal immigrants residing in the United States and criticized birthright citizenship for incentivizing anchor babies. President, he frequently described illegal immigration as an invasion and conflated immigrants with the criminal gang MS-13, though available research shows undocumented immigrants have a lower crime rate than native-born Americans. Trump attempted to drastically escalate immigration enforcement, including implementing harsher immigration enforcement policies against asylum seekers from Central America than any modern U.S. president. The order took effect immediately and without warning, causing confusion and chaos at airports. Protests against the ban began at airports the next day. Legal challenges to the order resulted in nationwide preliminary injunctions. A March 6 revised order, which excluded Iraq and gave other exemptions, again was blocked by federal judges in 3 states. In a decision in June 2017, the Supreme Court ruled that the ban could be enforced on visitors who lack a credible claim of a bona fide relationship with a person or entity in the United States. The temporary order was replaced by Presidential Proclamation 9645 on September 24, 2017, which restricted travel from the originally targeted countries except Iraq and Sudan, and further banned travelers from North Korea and Chad, along with certain Venezuelan officials. After lower courts partially blocked the new restrictions, the Supreme Court allowed the September version to go into full effect on December 4, 2017, and ultimately upheld the travel ban in a June 2019 ruling. Soon, Donald Trump returns to the White House 2024. Part 3.